let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the first KCMA trade webinar of 2022. A couple of quick housekeeping items. Please keep your phone and computers on mute. Save your questions until the end. And then if you have a question, you can unmute yourself or put it in the chat box. Luke and Tamara will save 10 or 15 minutes towards the end. So we hope that if you have any questions, please feel free to raise them then. We are also recording the session and it'll be posted on the KCMA member only portal sometime over the next couple of days. So let's go ahead and get started. I am pleased to introduce Luke Meisner and Tamara Browne of Schagrin Associates. As you all know, KCMA hired Schagrin about 2 years ago, pretty soon after the orders were put in place in, I guess, April of 2020. And their primary responsibility has been working on the various actions that our Chinese importers have been taking on with respect to perhaps unfair trade practices. So Luke and Tamara are going to walk you through where we are on not only the follow-up work on the trade case, but also work that Tamara is doing both in on Capitol Hill as well as in the executive branch. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you all.
Thanks, Betsy, and thanks everyone for joining us on this webinar on this Tuesday afternoon. We've got a lot of exciting things to talk about. A lot of things happening in the international trade world as they touch upon cabinets. Again, Luke Meisner here, partner at Schagrin Associates. I've been doing international trade for about 15 years, and I'm joined by my colleague, Tamara Browne, the Director of Government Affairs here at Schagrin Associates, and we're going to walk you through a lot of the exciting things that have been happening with respect to trade and cabinets. Quick disclaimer, everything we're discussing here today is the opinion of Schagrin Associates and does not necessarily reflect the position of the KCMA. So a quick overview on what we're going to cover. We've got the anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases on wooden cabinets and vanities and components thereof. What has been happening with those cases at the agency level, the Department of Commerce, as well as with the appeals, the challenges that the Chinese producers raised at the Court of International Trade. We're also going to talk about evasion that's been taking place of the anti-dumping countervailing duty or AD/CVD duties. Lots of stuff to talk about there. We've been very busy fighting those evasion efforts and have had quite a bit of success recently. We're going to talk about that. And then Tamara Browne will take over to talk about the legislative and policy issues that we've been engaged, the KCMA and KCMA members with as part of the 117th US Congress, and also working with the Biden administration and their trade agenda. So why don't we dive right in? We want to make sure that we save 10 to 15 minutes at the end of our presentation for questions. So we're going to do our best to stay on schedule. So the AD/CVD cases on imports from China. If you've probably seen this chart at some point before, these are still the rates that are in effect from the final anti-dumping duty orders, pretty high across the board. Ancient Tree, has a somewhat low rate, but everyone else is. Most companies are covered by that row, and the second to last row, the separate rate companies, the 48.50%. On the countervailing duty side, you can see some companies have individual rates ranging from 13% up to 293%. Most companies are covered by that all others rate, which is 20.93%. It's not up on the slide deck, but something to keep in mind is that imports are also still continuing to be covered by the 25% Section 301 duties that were imposed by the Trump administration, and which the Biden administration has left in place, and we believe will continue to do so. And here you can see the impact of those duties. I mean, at one point, at the peak, you're looking at $160 million worth of just cabinets, not even including vanities and components, just the kitchen cabinets, $160 million every month pouring in from China after the cases were filed and the duties imposed. And then finally in April 2020, the orders were issued by the Department of Commerce. You have really virtually zero imports coming in from China. There are some imports coming in, but virtually nothing compared to before. So very strong relief, very effective relief. Now, the Chinese producers have not, sat still since then. They are doing a lot of things to try to get the rates down or even make the rates go away. One of the ways they're doing this is through appeals at the Court of International Trade, a U.S. court located in New York City, where the Department of Commerce can be challenged. And there's 3 appeals. The first one was brought by Dolly and Meisner. And Dolly and Meisner, you may have heard this story before, but it came out during the investigation that although they told all their customers that they were using maple wood to make their cabinets, they were actually using birch wood. And they didn't disclose this fact to the Commerce Department. And so the Commerce Department said, well, because you were selling at a price that reflected maple wood, but your costs were based on purchasing birch wood, there's a mismatch between cost and price, and we can't really calculate an accurate dumping margin. So we're going to find that you did not cooperate in the investigation because you didn't disclose this problem to us from the outset, and they assigned them that high rate of over 200%. Now, we fought this as hard as we could at the Court of International Trade, or CIT. Unfortunately, Judge Baker said, well, yeah, this is a problem. Dolly and Meisner lied to its customers. Maybe the FTC should be involved. Maybe the customers should sue Dolly and Meisner in a civil litigation, but this is not a problem for dumping. Now, we disagree with that, but that's what the judge found. So he's remanded the proceedings back to Commerce, and we're in the middle of battling that, right now as we speak. Interesting things have happened. Most interesting one is that as we've dug further into the facts, it turns out that Dolly and Meisner may have also failed to disclose to Commerce that some of its customers in the United States were affiliates. You may know Dolly and Meisner as J&K Cabinetry or JK Cabinetry. They've got branches all over the United States, and they reported most of them, but it looks like some of their affiliates here in the United States, they did not disclose. And so we've brought that to the attention of Commerce, and we think they should continue to get that very high adverse facts available rate. But we're continuing to battle that. Commerce's final remand results are due back at the court on May 17th, 2022. I'm not sure what the agency is going to do, but we think they're going to do the right thing. Another appeal. This is on the subsidy side, or the countervailing duties that were imposed. Again, Dolly and Meisner challenged the manner that Commerce calculated subsidy rates. One of the subsidies that Commerce countervailed was export buyers credits. It's basically a subsidy that the government of China provides to buyers to help provide them cheap financing when they purchase Chinese cabinets. So Commerce countervailed this program because the government of China didn't provide information in response to Commerce's requests. We had oral argument on June 8th, 2021. And to be honest, the judge was very critical of the agency. And I don't have a lot of confidence that we're going to hold up on that one program. The subsidies, most of the subsidies are going to stick. That one program, which is responsible for about 10% of the countervailing duties, I think has a possibility of being remanded. But I've got this, that's me at the end of that table watching that clock, because we had the oral argument back in June 2021, and we're still waiting for the judge to rule. So that's something to look out for. Last court appeal. This had to put this big victory meme up there, because this was a big victory for the Kcma and for the domestic industry. This was a challenge by Ancient Tree, who was challenging the manner in which Commerce calculated the dumping margins in a way that would not just impact Ancient Tree's dumping margin, but it would impact all of the Chinese producers' dumping margins. And in fact, it even had the potential of bringing all the margins down to 0%, which would make the entire order just go away. All that strong relief would evaporate. So it was very important that we win this case, and we did win it after a lot of twists and turns. In March 2022, Judge Kcma upheld basically Commerce's entire anti-dumping duty methodology. So all those rates will remain in place. Now, Ancient Tree does have an opportunity to appeal this case to the next level, which is the federal circuit. The deadline is May 20th. We're hoping they won't do that, but if they do, by the time it gets so high up there, we'd still have to battle to protect the rates, but we're having a good feeling about this one, and this was a major victory for the industry. So that turns to that's what's happening at the courts. Back over at the Commerce Department agency level, we've had a lot of things we've been working on over the last year. One is a new shipper review. This is basically set up so that if there's a company that is completely new or was not shipping cabinets to the United States during part of the original investigation, it can raise its hand and say, hey, those rates that you calculated don't apply to me because I'm new. Calculate a new rate for me. Dalian Hualing asked for one of these, and we battled it out, and we basically argued actually they had shipped some cabinet components to the United States in the past. They were not a new shipper. Commerce agreed with us in November 2021. So Dalian Hualing is going to keep the same rate that previously applied to it, that 48.5%. So this was another minor but significant victory. Another thing that's been happening at Commerce is administrative reviews. And you may have questions about this. I'm going to try to walk you through it. So those rates that are calculated in the original investigation, the ones that were on that table that I put up at the beginning, those do not, they can last forever, but they typically do not, because the Chinese producers and the importers here in the United States can ask for a review of the rates so that they're modified. And the idea is, okay, fine, you caught us dumping before, or you caught the government of China providing us all these subsidies in the past. But in response to this order being issued, we changed our pricing behavior. We stopped dumping, we raised our prices, and we stopped receiving subsidies from the Chinese government. So you need to calculate new dumping rates and new subsidy rates that reflect these new facts on the ground. So Commerce will do almost like a whole new investigation to see what's going on. The change in the rates have two effects. Any imports of cabinets that have come in since the orders were issued, and there's not a whole lot that's come in, but anything that's come in, has had to pay the duties as we go along. So if you imported $1 million worth of cabinets since the orders were issued, you had to pay that 48% duty, you're looking at whatever that $480,000 you paid as a cash deposit rate. Now, if as part of the review process, the rate goes from 48% down to 15%, then you will get a return, a refund of the duties that you paid as a result of the change in the dumping rates or the subsidy rates. There's also a prospective effect of the change in the rates to the administrative review, because as soon as Commerce issues those new rates, any future imports that come in will now be subject to those new and revised rates. So takeaway here is very important to keep the rates up, to keep the relief in place and strong. One thing I'll mention here is, why do we have to get involved? You might think, well, why can't we just let Commerce act on its own? And that would be a mistake to sort of sit on the sidelines. And here's one of the reasons, an important one. Commerce currently has 664 AD/CVD orders in place. 2 of those are for cabinets from the AD and the CVD order of cabinets from China. The oldest orders date back to 1978. So this is 664 orders that have been issued after all these years. 203 orders have been issued since 2019. I mean, there's just been a huge surge, big momentum in filing new cases. And so the Commerce Department, they're really kind of underwater, not through no fault of their own. They have a lot of orders to administer, a lot of reviews, a lot of data to look at and crunch and try to figure out who's lying, who's telling the truth, what are the rates. So you've got to get the domestic industry involved to help them battle this out and sift through all the data and keep the relief in place. This is a side note. I've got a table here of the countries with the most orders in place, and you just see China by far way above any other country, and that's just because, I mean, China really does present a very unique challenge to the global trading order, with just the level of dumping and subsidization and state-owned enterprises that are operating over there, as the cabinets industry knows so well. So that's why we have to fight these administrative reviews. So the reviews that are going on now, they were initiated June 2021. On the dumping side, there have been a lot of companies that have sort of been looked at, but currently Kufoo Xinyu is the only company actively participating as a mandatory respondent that's being reviewed by Commerce. There was some other companies that were selected as mandatory respondents, but they said they weren't going to cooperate. So they're going to head towards that total adverse facts available rate. Kufoo Xinyu has been cooperating, meaning, it's been submitting data and responding to Commerce's questionnaires. So they're going to get a calculated rate, and that calculated rate will likely apply to roughly 30 other Chinese exporters and producers that are part of the review. There's a similar story going on the subsidy side. Dalian Hualing is currently the only company participating on the subsidy side, and its rate will likely apply to 53 other Chinese exporters and producers. We've been very active on this recently, especially because the preliminary results for Commerce's review are coming up in May 2nd, 2022. So expect to hear some news on changes in the rates at that time. Scope rulings. This is another thing we've been very active on. So the scope, the way these orders work is they define merchandise that is under the scope of the orders. That is, what merchandise is covered and is subject to duties and what merchandise is not. And the scope is very long, but the most important part is here, and it says the merchandise subject to the order consists of wooden cabinets and vanities that are for permanent installation. That was a key difference during the investigations and trying to define what we were trying to get relief for and what was covered and what was not. And the idea was we always wanted to cover cabinets for permanent installation, not freestanding cabinets, not a chest of drawers. And so a lot of the scope ruling requests that have been issued have to do with this idea of, okay, what is a cabinet for permanent installation and what is not? Because the kind of scenario you see is one where, if you're a US importer and you've got something and, you don't think it's a kitchen cabinet that should be covered, and you have a good faith basis for believing that, but there's a little gray area there, then you can request that Commerce issue a ruling that states definitively whether or not your merchandise is covered or not. So here's just some examples of scope ruling requests we've received. So, here's one on the left. Here's an interesting case, the Sandon flow wall cabinets. And the picture might be kind of small, but this is basically part of like a garage or modular storage system where you first hang up that panel rack in the back, and then on top of that, you can hang all sorts of things, a hook for your tennis racket, but also you can hang your cabinets there. But the whole way these things are built is that, hey, if you want to reorganize your garage, well, you can take those cabinets and shift them over. And so they're, the argument here would be, these are not for permanent installation. They're made in a way that they can be shifted around. So, was that covered or not? Fortunately, when these guys submitted their request, it was deficient for technical reasons, and Commerce rejected it, and they have not refiled a request. The second one I think is an easier case. This is a Disney beverage station. If you fortunate enough to be able to take some time off and go to Disney World and stay in one of their resorts, their hotels and one of their resorts, you might see one of these in your hotel room. It's a beverage station. You can imagine a little mini fridge at the bottom of that where they've got some Coca-Cola or water, bottled water, whatever. And it's a cabinet. You can see it's got the box, it's got drawers, but it's a freestanding cabinet. And so it's not the kind of cabinet that we believe should be covered by the order. And that was Disney submitted this request, and we agreed with them. And so we did not oppose their scope ruling request. Finally, here's one that on the right, Sandon shampoo cabinet. You go to the barber or the salon and you get your hair cut. Well, here's one of these cabinets where you get to lean back and relax while someone shampoos and massages your head. Is this the kind of cabinet that we want covered? Well, hey, usually you have plumbing associated in the back of this. So this looks more like permanent installation, doesn't it? But we're still digging into this and figuring out whether we should oppose it. I'll tell you that it's just so important to get these scope rulings right, because what's happening all the time is that a lot of the Chinese producers, they're looking for a crack in the scope of the order. They're looking for a leak, a way they can start shipping again. And it's often through these scope rulings where Commerce makes a ruling and it opens up a loophole in the order. And, and a recent example that actually just today, there's a ruling on this. There's an order on aluminum extrusions from China. And so one thing that happened early on was they requested a ruling for pallets, like shipping pallets, not made out of wood, but I guess you can make shipping pallets made out of aluminum. So they said, well, if you take aluminum and you turn it into a shipping pallet, well, that shouldn't be covered by the order on aluminum extrusions. And after they got that in place, then you had this one company that started shipping basically bogus aluminum shipping pallets to the United States. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of these shipping pallets. And then they set up companies here in the United States to take those fake pallets, melt the aluminum back down to a point where it would be saleable, and basically got around, the orders in that way through that evasion scheme. Now they actually ended up getting caught, and just today, the Department of Justice issued and the court issued a final ruling ordering the folks that were involved in this evasion scheme to pay $3.1 billion in restitution for failure to pay the duties. But we don't want to have to get to that point. We need to really make sure we focus on these scope rulings and don't allow any cracks in the relief to form. So that's a good segue for anti-evasion efforts. There's so many ways that Chinese producers and importers can work together to evade. These are the most common ones. I'll say the one on the top left, for cabinets from China, 95 to 99% of all evasion is transshipment, meaning they ship the cabinets from China to a third country like Malaysia, and then they repackage the cabinets, maybe do a little reprocessing, and then ship it to the United States and say, oh, this stuff is made in Malaysia, so we don't have to pay the duties. So that's really what we're talking about when it comes to evasion. So here you can look, here's the top suppliers of kitchen cabinets ranked in order of how much they sent to the United States in 2021. You look at Vietnam, you've probably seen some of these statistics before. In 2018, before the orders were in place, only $5 million worth of shipments of cabinets. They've now multiplied that by 100 to get $508 million worth of kitchen cabinets in 2021. Now, there's a lot of legitimate production in Vietnam. We know that, but there's also some evasion taking place there. Same thing with Malaysia. We know there's some transshipment taking place in Malaysia, absolutely, for sure. Those are the two we've focused on the most and are the biggest problems. I'll also mention, not really sure what's going on in Mexico. That's something we need to look at. And if folks on the call have any idea, we'd love to hear from you, because Mexico has always produced cabinets, at least they have for a while, but they're also doubling almost every year since 2019. We've also, we'll talk about some cases involving Indonesia as well, since we've had success there. I will say we've been fighting Malaysia very hard, and you can see that actually in 2022, for the first time, we're seeing a decline in imports from Malaysia instead of an increase. And I think we can attribute that to our anti-evasion efforts. So let's talk about some of those efforts. So one of the biggest cases we've won so far through investigations under the Enforce and Protect Act, working with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. This one investigation, 7603, this involved the U.S. importers Cabinet Depot, is the business name they go by. They were importing cabinets from Hoka, Vietnam. And what we discovered was happening in this investigation is that the Vietnamese company was importing partially finished components from China, doors and frames, the things that are really hard to make, drawers, I think, as well. And then they were making the cabinet boxes in Vietnam. And they're finishing it and shipping RTA cabinets to the United States that were a combination of Chinese components and Vietnamese components. Well, the order clearly says that at least part of the value, if not all of the value of that final RTA cabinet is subject to the order. So when they were caught, Customs found they were evading, and these were big time shippers. We think in 2020 alone, U.S. Cabinet Depot imported over $40 million worth of cabinets from Vietnam. So this was a big win for our anti-evasion efforts. Another one that we're actively battling right now is this transshipment through Indonesia, a U.S. importer called Kcma Associates, who, by the way, has been caught evading in the past by Customs. Now, this one is kind of in an interesting situation because Customs set up a site visit of the Indonesian suppliers in October 2021. It was a 3-hour site visit. They put a partially redacted report of the site visit on the record of the investigation. And to be honest, they just did not do a good job. They did not dig in. They were only there for 3 hours. They didn't really know what to look for. And so they found that the Indonesian suppliers, iWood and Sunwell, are legitimately producing these products in Indonesia and exporting them to the United States. Now, we did some more digging and we found some devastating evidence that actually these Indonesian suppliers had been getting cabinets and cabinet components from their affiliates in China. So we're this one I can see going either way. To me, I don't think there's any doubt that there's transshipment taking place, but this site visit and what the DHS officials said while they were there gives me a little bit of concern. Here's a third investigation we've been working on. This one we have a preliminary affirmative determination. It was just issued last month, March 10th. It involves 6 U.S. importers up here on the screen, and they were all transshipping through Malaysia through the same Malaysian company, South Wales Furniture. If you've attended some of our webinars in the past, you know that we've hired private investigators to put boots on the ground in Malaysia to figure out what's going on there. And that's how we got this evidence of evasion and brought it to the attention of Customs. Customs issued a preliminary affirmative determination based on some interesting evidence. They asked for evidence from the Malaysian companies. They said, well, give us some photographs of your facilities and prove that you're actually manufacturing there. So the Malaysian facilities sent some photographs to Customs, and Customs looked at them and said, these appeared to be staged. They just had, like, instead of all the equipment being in a line in a logical way, it was just kind of randomly placed throughout the warehouse. And, there's some other evidence too, like no sawdust anywhere, that tended to show they weren't actually doing any manufacturing. They also did some visits, on-site visits. Here they found that basically nothing was happening at all at these facilities. So there couldn't have been any production taking place. And finally, this is, to me, maybe the most interesting. They uncovered evidence of this Shenzhen Arc cross-border logistics company. It's like, it sounds like a classic Chinese logistics company. But what this company was doing is it would work with Chinese cabinets producers to help them ship the cabinets to Malaysia, including to, what's the name of this company? South Wales Furniture. Then they would help them, the Malaysian company who was affiliated with Shenzhen would repackage the cabinets. And then this is where it gets really interesting to me, is Shenzhen also had set up some affiliates in the United States to do the importing. And so if you're like a local mom and pop kitchen and bath shop here in the United States that wants to get Chinese cabinets without paying the duties, this Shenzhen Arc is basically a one-stop shop for transshipment. You don't even have to be the importer. You don't even have to risk having to pay the duties yourself, because it's the Chinese that are kind of putting themselves out there in the line for the potential dumping liability. So this is, but we uncovered this evidence, and Customs did a really great job here of uncovering it. I'm pretty sure we're going to head to a final affirmative on this, but Customs still has 9 months to conclude its investigation. We're working on others. Can't tell you much about it now because we don't want to disclose anything until it becomes public, but we do have some other things cooking, including EAP investigations. We're also looking at taking some other very bold moves that in the near future that would address evasion on a more systemic and countrywide level. So stay posted. And in the meantime, again, we always invite you all, if you hear something, then you should say something. Please contact Betsy Natz. A lot of the evidence we've gathered for these EFA investigations I've been discussing have started with tips from KCMA members. So please, if you come across concrete evidence, then please forward it our way. And that concludes my discussion on the sort of trade litigation side. So I'm going to pass it over to my esteemed colleague, Tamara Browne.
Thanks, Luke. And Betsy, thank you again for organizing this, and thank you to everyone at the KCMA that's participating in today's webinar. As Luke mentioned, it's a pleasure to return to work with you on these key issues and provide you with an update. And as you may recall, I've worked at Schagrin Associates for a number of years. I've had the great opportunity to work with so many of the U.S. companies. Even in your organization last year, I've been able to see some of the facilities. So it's been a wonderful opportunity to learn more. I thought what I would do is complement what Luke has provided earlier in his comments today about our combined work with regard to outreach within the administration and with Congress. As I had mentioned earlier last year when we had this presentation, we worked very closely with the KCMA on particular areas of interest and wanted to highlight that for the calendar year 2022. This includes activities and engagement with key trade agency officials. And here we are referring to primarily the Commerce Department, as well as the Department of Homeland Security's Customs and Border Protection. Each member of Congress as well interacts with these leaders, and obviously the agency heads report directly to the president. So we feel it's very important to keep them educated and aware of industry issues. We've continued to work very closely through your engagement as producers of cabinets to collaborate with the administration and Congress to continue to advance and support trade remedy legislation. We also, as I would mention, I will talk about that in greater depth shortly in terms of trade legislation. But we are working to make sure that the domestic supply chain issues are continued to be addressed through any advanced legislation, either through the Build Back Better program or through Made in America programs. The latter is a program that has been launched in the last few months through the new Made in America office that is run out of the Office of Management and Budget and reports directly to the president. And then, of course, equally as important is our participation as contributors to the dialogue with global trade partners to continue to address what we believe are systemic trade distorting practices that impact the industry, and emphasizing our ongoing work with customs and enforcement issues. Next slide. And if I could just, I will move forward on that. So where we are now in 2022, we are in the second session, the final year of this 117th Congress. We've had a historic number, as you probably have seen in the press, or if you're following it, a historic number of retirements in the House primarily, as well as a few in the Senate for the new calendar year next year, when we will move into the 118th Congress. Right now, the current roster in the House and Senate, we have 5 vacancies in the House as a result of resignations or death. The most recent, unfortunately, the at-large member from Alaska, the late Don Young. And then in the Senate, we do have a full roster there in that body with 100 senators in place. There on the bottom right of the slide is the updated Kcma delegation breakdown. And you will see you have a very large footprint in the US Congress. And that's one of the benefits of having such a large geographic presence throughout the United States, is that you have the very creative options to engage and communicate with your members in the House districts as well as the states. And you're looking at over 130 House districts and in 62 Senate offices. So very compelling. And the next slide shows you just the representation as a visual on our map. And you will see here the extensive footprint that the association members have. And what I've done is working with Betsy and her team to continue to elevate your presence before key policymakers. In terms of opportunities to continue to engage this year, as we move to the next slide, we will look at key areas of advocacy as well as legislative priorities. The next slide will highlight 4 members in Congress that we've been working with very closely since the middle of last year to advance the trade remedy bill that we call today the Level the Playing Field Act. The 2 primary senators involved in the development of the legislation are Ohio Senators Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman, and both serve on the Senate Finance Committee, which has jurisdiction over trade issues. They also are leaders in separate committees. Senator Brown is the chairman of the Banking Committee in the Senate, and Senator Portman is the ranking member on the Senate Government Affairs and Homeland Security Committee. So very influential, very dedicated public servants to keeping a level playing field for American companies and their workers. Their bill is pending in the Senate, and through engagement, including great work by the Kcma and your members to outreach and build support for a House bill, we were able to get a very similar bill introduced in December of 2021. And that measure was introduced by Congresswoman Terry Sewell from Alabama, who serves on the Ways and Means Committee, and Bill Johnson, a Republican from Ohio, who serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee, but who has been a true supporter and champion of American industry. In terms of legislative priorities, next slide, what I wanted to mention again is that the previous slide showed the supporters of the Leveling the Playing Field Act, and we're continuing to work on that very closely. I'll elaborate on that shortly. We are continuing to work on identifying options for additional customs enforcement legislation to close the loopholes, and as what Luke mentioned earlier, enhance what we already have in the Enforce and Protect Act, which was passed and signed into law in 2016. We're continuing to work as Build Back Better. This initiative, as you know, was a very large bill in its infancy and has been pared down. We're not really certain if it will really clear hurdles to advance and move prior to the end of this Congress, but we want to keep momentum there to ensure that there are procurement opportunities for American business, and that includes Buy America and Made in America program. And then finally, with regard to 2022 and moving to the next year in 2023, we are currently in the process of reviewing the budget for the key federal agencies. This includes the Commerce Department and Customs, and we will be working closely with Betsy and her staff and members to ensure that there is support for adequate funding to carry out the work that the agencies have to do in the area of AD/CVD laws as well as enforcement. An example of KCMA engagement on the trade remedies bill was in December when a number of letters were sent to key members of Congress urging them to co-sponsor this legislation, HR 6121. And in gratitude to the KCMA members and Betsy's efforts, we did pick up a number of co-sponsors. I believe we ended up close to 40. And what that did was, in a short period of time, this bill was introduced in early December. And by the end of the month, even though we were approaching the holidays, we were able to get the language of this bill in what would then become the Competes Act, which passed the House on February 4th, 2022. And that was really a result of a very, very significant level of engagement from impacted sectors across America, including members of the organization. To enhance our stature and our footing there in Congress, the KCMA also signed on to a letter with 174 other groups and co-signers to the congressional leadership, emphasizing the importance of keeping the trade remedy provisions that we have in the two bills together as one as we approach what we call a conference between the House and the Senate. When there are differences in legislation and they are passed separately by each chamber, if the bills are not identical, the next process is to go to a conference. And that's the position that we're in today as of April 12th, where the House has passed their measure in February and the Senate just completed their equivalent measure on the China competition bill last week. And I should say 2 weeks ago. And we're now moving into the conference setting, and I would just highlight that as we work on the Competes Act. Next slide, please. So what we've done is we're now at a position where both measures have cleared their chambers. The House and the Senate leadership announced conferees from both chambers, one of the largest conferences in recent time, probably in the last 10 to 15 years in both bodies, to have over 50 conferees named in this joint conference. And that occurred last week. We are now working with them as the leadership of both chambers works with members to define a timeline to advance the conference forward. And this is exactly where KCMA engagement becomes really important. On this next slide, I highlighted key members of Congress in both the House and the Senate who we have worked with as an industry, who are conferees. And here in the Senate, you will see that we have, of course, Senator Browne is one of the conferees, Mark Warner of Virginia, Gary Peters of Michigan, Ron Wyden of Oregon, and Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. I apologize, there should have been I next to W. She has been a very strong supporter of the industry, and as well as Senator Wyden, who chairs the Finance Committee and will be one of the lead conferees in this process. On the Republican side, Rob Portman, of course, another original sponsor of the bill with Sherrod Brown, is a conferee, along with Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, Todd Young, who, we have a huge footprint of cabinet manufacturing facilities in the state of Indiana. He is the lead Republican on the China Competition Act, wants that bill to advance, and has been a strong supporter of the trade section, and is a co-sponsor. So we will want to work very closely with him, along with Richard Shelby from Alabama and Mike Crapo, who is the ranking member on the Senate Finance Committee from Idaho. Going back to Alabama, the cabinet industry has a very large footprint in that state. And we are hopeful that KCMA members will engage with guidance that we can provide to work with Senator Shelby to ensure that he understands and is mindful of the important trade provisions that could be included in this conference agreement. In the House, Democrats are led by the Ways and Means Committee Chairman Richard Neal of Massachusetts. Dan Kildee is also from the Ways and Means Committee from Michigan, and it continues with Mr. DeFazio from Oregon, Don McEachin from Virginia, and Texas and Pennsylvania members respectively. They all have very, very critical interests in advancing the bill, and we feel it's very important to reach out to them during this process. And that also includes Republicans in the House who were part of the conference. Rick Crawford from Arkansas, who has been one of the strongest supporters of the trade laws because of his agriculture and manufacturing interests in the state of Arkansas. Mike Boss from Illinois, who is in the southern part of the state, close to Granite City, St. Louis metro area, another very critical supporter, along with Glenn Thompson, Carol Miller, and Darren Hood. So these are just some of the examples of conferees that I'm going to recommend that KCMA support through engagement, through communicates with members and staff in the coming weeks. And of course, at the end, I'd be happy to take any questions. In terms of priorities, as we've mentioned, we'll continue to work with your delegation to advance legislation and policies that will enhance evasion tools through EAPA and e-allegations. We're going to continue to work to ensure everybody in Congress knows about the kitchen cabinet manufacturers and what they do to build the economy and the great wages they provide to their workers, and supporting domestic procurement, working to fully fund budgets and appropriations for critical trade agencies, and of course work with you when you are either a request is made, or if you request a member to visit your facility on a future date in 2022. And in terms of engagement opportunities, the next slide, just wanted to showcase that when we engage with Congress, it's an opportunity to showcase the entire industry. We did that last early summer at Countrywood in June of 2021 with the Indiana Congressional Delegation. It was a huge eye-opener for the staff, who reported back to their senators, Brown and Young, respectively. And we want to continue that. We want to be part of roundtables and briefings that will highlight your industry and their concerns about federal policies and ways that they can engage. And of course, work on advocacy campaigns, both in the states and districts, to develop policies to shape future legislation in Congress. And then most recently, last fall, we were able to do a very innovative virtual tour of the Wellborn Cabinets facility that was hosted by Wellborn under KCMA and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Service staff. Over 75 of them participated from across the country. And it really provided us with a great opportunity to see a complete operation in a time in our nation and world where we weren't certain if we could do it in person, but we were able to do it in a hybrid way where we had folks on the ground there, including Betsy and Luke, who were there, and the Wellborn staff, and then hosting it through a digital platform where we did the virtual tour on the floor. And it was an amazing process, and it showed us that we can be very creative, and we received huge compliments from the agency about what they learned. And I do believe, if Luke would agree with me, it's really helped us even cement our relationship more with the Customs Service about the incredible things that your industry has done, and unfortunately the things that you've had to deal with in terms of unfair trade. And just wrapping up quickly on timelines, just to give you an idea of where Congress is. course, we're in April now, but we've moved beyond getting the budget in. April through August will really be some critical time for legislation to move. Since it's a midterm election year, there's, because of course, continued unfortunate partisan divide there. Many people think we won't see much come out after, say, the 4th of July recess in terms of critical legislation. So that's one of the reasons why we are pushing very hard on the China conference bill competes to get our trade law provisions in there. And I think, you'll hear from me often through Betsy about engagement in the next 4 to 6 weeks on that. As we move into August, we'll go into the recess period, and Congress comes back after Labor Day. They will have to pass continuing or full appropriation bills because the calendar year for the US government fiscal year ends on September 30th. So we're hopeful that they can get a little farther this year than they did last year. Members will recess early because it's a midterm election. And we think they'll probably be in through early October, probably the first, latest second week, to give them time to go back and campaign. As we said earlier, there's a historical number of seats open and also seats in contention for the 2022. And then the midterm election is the 8th of November. And after that, Congress will return for votes, and the organization of the 118th Congress then begins after that. So, the likelihood is that, as I've always said to folks, you have incredible coverage in Congress. You work with both sides of the aisle. That's what we always promote, and I think it's the best way to do it. So even if there's a change in leadership in the House and Senate, later this year in 2022, we are going to be very well positioned to carry out the objectives and mission of the association. And I think I did it in pretty good time, right, Luke?
Hey, thank you both. You and Tamara, you and Luke. And we have about 5-6 minutes for questions. And I'll just start it off, Luke. I don't know if you saw the chat or if it just went to Mike, but I know there's a lot of concern within the industry as to whether or not the current administration will remove President Trump's 301 tariffs on imported products from China, in particular, our HTS codes. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I would say, first, I do not have any serious concerns that the Biden administration is going to remove the 25% 301 tariffs. There's a lot of news that came out, maybe, 3 weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, where the U.S. trade representative under the Biden administration had granted some exclusions to about maybe 350, maybe 400 product categories of imports from China, and that created a lot of concern in different quarters on whether this meant that that was like a real weakening of the resolve on taking a strong line on China and Chinese imports. I would say no, it wasn't. I mean, there was, if you recall, after the Trump administration announced the 301 tariffs, there was a process for applying for exclusions to very specific products imported from China. If you could show that there was no way to get these products from the United States or some other third country without, moving mountains, basically. And so the Trump administration had already granted, thousands of product exclusions under that process. And then it had also extended the deadline for those product exclusions to expire, because they're always meant to expire. The idea is, okay, look, you've got some widget that you can only import from China right now. No one in the United States makes it. Fine, we'll give you an exclusion of, let's say, a year. But during that year, you need to find someone in the United States who can make that, or you need to make it yourself, or you need to find, or maybe you can import it from Vietnam or Germany or some third country, but we don't want you importing it from China. So some people had a problem, even with a year finding an alternative supply. So there was the opportunity to extend the deadline for the exclusions. And so the 350 product exclusions that were granted recently, they were really just extensions of exclusions that had already been granted. The process for the extensions really had started during the Trump administration. Everything else we're hearing from the Biden administration is that they're going to continue to keep the tariffs on Chinese imports in place.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we adjourn? Okay, going once, twice? All right, well, we thank you all so much for joining us. And as I said, we'll post this on the Kcma member portal sometime the next couple of days. And I know it was a lot to digest. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me. And as Luke said, we really rely on tips and leads from our members. As a matter of fact, I would say that other than the boots on the ground during our 2 investigations, all the other leads that have led us to our EAP allegations, allegations, and so on have come from our members. And so, keep your eyes open and ears to the ground, and let us know if you hear or have any concerns about potential, illegal imports into the United States. So with that, if there are no other questions.
Betsy, there is one question.
Okay.
Sorry. It was the status of the American Competes Act. This person had sent emails to their senators in support of the bill, understanding China is building cabinet manufacturing plants in Mexico. How will this affect the future of the cabinet manufacturers in the U.S.?
I couldn't hear that last part, Mike. What was it?
So if China's building cabinet manufacturing plants in Mexico, how will this affect the future of the cabinet manufacturing in the United States?
That's a tough question. What I will say is, if they're legitimately making the cabinets in Mexico, and we see this happen quite a bit with cases where China's taken over an industry, and then brings the U.S. domestic industry to its knees, and we win strong relief against imports from China. And then as time moves on, you see the Chinese industry, it's the same owners. They've got the experience, they've got the capital, they've got sometimes the equipment. They'll literally ship the same equipment that was in China to a third country. Now, if they're really making those cabinets in Mexico, just like if they're really making it in Vietnam or Malaysia, and they're using raw materials to, doing all the cutting and processing and painting and staining, everything that it takes to make a cabinet, that's not evasion. That's not transshipment. That's just a new Mexican producer. And so we can't cover that through the existing orders. Of course, there's always the possibility that at some point in the future that the injury gets so bad to the domestic industry here in the United States, they could consider filing new cases. And so that's, if it got to that point, that would be our counsel to Kcma and domestic industry.
And also, Luke, in terms of the USMCA agreement, for Kcma members, there are certain provisions in the text of that agreement between the 3 countries with regards looking at import levels and surges. And as Luke had mentioned earlier in the data that he shared earlier in the webinar, I think it warrants very close review of that volume and that increase that's come from there, and to do a bit more due diligence. And that's why it's really, as I said earlier, the complement from the legal and the outreach side of the work is to educate these members of Congress and the agencies about possible issues, that diversions or perhaps questionable activity, say in a country like Mexico, making these products. And so I think we do need to be very vigilant on that. And that's where educating even, say, the U.S. Trade Representative, who I mentioned to Luke earlier today, she likes to go out and see plants. And if there's an opportunity that we could work with her to come and see one of the cabinet manufacturing plants, especially to highlight what's happened in Asia, how it's impacted their industry, and then also perhaps segue into others, that would be a great, opportunity for her too, because she tends to like to accept invitations. She's a former staffer on the Hill, but also a counsel in previous roles, and she does like to get out and see the actual terms of business and how business is conducted. So might be a nice opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you all next week at our spring